I sit at the intersection of science, entrepreneurship, and policy. One almost doesn't work without the other. Science needs to be present because we need the innovation, we need the research and development. Entrepreneurship needs to be present, in my opinion, because a lot of the vehicles that we currently have are slow to implement. And then obviously we need policy, because like it or not, the policies that are made literally directly affect our access to vaccines, trade deals, access to literally everything.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to 1000 Voices, where we are on a mission to speak to, sit down and discuss with 1000 Black British changemakers. Now, today we've got another very, very special guest on the podcast, and I was finding it quite difficult to narrow down and give her, narrow down everything she does, because she does a lot of stuff, a lot of amazing work, and narrow it down into a nice, concise intro. But I'm going to give it a try. So, our guest today, first of all, she's a serial entrepreneur. She's been involved in the business world in a number of different capacities. She's co-founded businesses. She's working as a consultant. She's been involved in the business as a director, as a non-executive director. She has a heart for Africa and also for just empowering and uplifting people, especially from people from underrepresented backgrounds. And above all, she's a recognized global leader in the public health and the global health space. She's won a number of different awards. She was recognized in 2016 by the European Commission, and up until very recently, she was very recently awarded as one of the 40 Black future leaders by Black Culture Archives. So that's a very concise intro, but without further ado, we have the very amazing Dr. Elsa Zekeng, aka the Science Entrepreneur on the podcast.
That's a different intro. Never really quite called myself a serial entrepreneur, but hey,
what's the definition of a serial entrepreneur? Is it someone that's started more than one business?
I mean, I guess. That goes to show you how, unassuming I am by the things that I do. But yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's all good. Thank you for coming on. And now I'm very excited to have you on. Like I was saying, your background is so varied, that is so layered, so multifaceted. Mm-hmm. And I just, very excited to have you on and come to speak a bit more about you, your motivations, the work you do, and all of that stuff. So thank you for coming to the podcast once again. Mm-hmm. So let's start off here. Mm-hmm. Usually we like to start off chronologically.
Okay.
And, go into background and upbringing, that kind of thing, to set some context. But before we get into that, first question I'd like to ask you is, with everything that you do, what's the why that drives you?
Oh, starting with a reflective question. What is the why? I would say the why is impact. And that is impact across, again, science is the thread that runs through almost everything that I've done. And that is impacting, number one, the scientific community. Number two, impacting Black people. Number three, impacting women. And if we're talking geographically, I would say impacting obviously the continent of Africa, and by virtue of having lived here for the past 15 years, Europe, and really enabling that partnership between Europe and Africa. It has been a contentious one. It still is a contentious one. But trying to hopefully make it become one that is less contentious, and that we can actually work together for a more equal world. So yeah, I'll say impact across those themes.
Great. All right. Thank you for that. So let's kick things off. You said that you've been living there for the past 15 years.
That is correct.
Can you paint a picture as to what your childhood was like, where you grew up,
Sure.
What the environment was like, and we start from there?
So I was actually born in Leeds, but I grew up in Cameroon, in Yaoundé, to be specific. That's the capital of Cameroon. I went to boarding school in Cameroon, an all-girl boarding school, for 5 years. I moved to the UK when I was 15. I went to Reading, to Queen Anne's, another boarding school, all-girls boarding school. There's a theme there. My parents are obviously on keeping me in all-girls boarding school. So I did all-girls boarding schools for 7 years, 5 years Cameroon, 2 years here. Then I went to uni to do my BSc molecular biology. But I guess more pointedly to your question, what was my childhood like? I come from a very loving family. So 2 parents, there's 4 of us, 3 girls, 1 boy. I have never wanted or lacked for anything, to be honest. Probably consider myself quite spoiled and privileged in many senses of the word. My dad is a scientist. My mom is a pharmacist. So science and was not far-fetched at all. To be honest, it was probably quite the expected career choice. My mom is also a business owner. So again, entrepreneurship and business, not far-fetched at all. But what I found was quite interesting was I was on a panel at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, probably in 2015 or 2016. And someone asked a question about the representation of women and girls in science, or STEM in general. And something that was interesting was that she stated a statistic that what they found in this study, that girls who went to all girls boarding schools, well, all girls schools, doesn't have to be boarding school, all girls schools, tended to stay in science longer. And that was predominantly because when they were growing up, really, they were during those teenage years, when they found out that they were in classes with other girls, they didn't feel shy to either give a wrong answer or to put their hands up, whereas when they found that they were in classes with mixed schools, either the boys would tease if they said something wrong, and then the girls would then shy away. And that was the first time I actually heard about that study. And then we looked around at each other, and there were 4 of us on the panel, 4 women, all in science, at least at PhD level, and we all went to all girls schools. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a thing there, maybe there's a trick to that. And then I obviously went on to do my own research, and yes, that's definitely something that has been proven. So I say that to say maybe that has a part to play in why I've stayed in science this long, and why I have never felt, inferior, or felt like that was something that was far-fetched or that I couldn't do. And again, I came from a family home where it was very encouraged. So my dad was my biggest champion, my mom. So so I realized that I actually came from a cocoon where I was encouraged to do all these things. And then I came, a lot of years later on, and we're having all these conversations, and I start realizing that all those things I perhaps took for granted were things that a lot of people, are not privileged to have. And then when opportunities came up to address them, so for example, by being on a board of the Science and Industry Museum, I took upon that role. And one of the things that I do is really trying to champion opening up those spaces. So let's say a child is at home and that's not really encouraged. Hopefully they can find different communities and go to different spaces where they can be inspired to pursue these different career options. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a background as to my upbringing in that sense. And so yeah, I've been in the UK since.
No, definitely does. Gives a lot of context, actually. Mm-hmm. That stat we spoke about with the young girls who go to all girls schools are more likely to stay within the STEM subjects for a longer period of time. I've never heard of that. The first time I'm ever hearing about it. Oh, wow. And thinking about it, it makes some sense actually as well. It's known anyways that there's certain fields that are very male dominated. Mm-hmm. STEM is one of them. You go into tech, engineering, etc., you're going to find primarily men. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a reason for that. And then the way you've explained it there and then makes some sense. And then it makes some sense as well when you look into some of the work you've got involved in later on, which we will touch on later on. But mm-hmm. The work you've got into trying to promote some mm-hmm. More diversity in STEM and technology makes some sense and sets a lot of context. With looking back a little bit, so with you and the family moving over, I'm assuming the whole family moved over to the UK.
No, it's just me.
Oh, okay. Okay, don't assume. Okay.
No, so sorry, just to that point, again, I was listening to a podcast and the person being interviewed, he said, he opened his podcast by saying something that really defined him is that he was raised in South Chicago. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so what is something that really defines me? Because I wasn't raised in one particular place. So upon reflection, something that really defines me is I'm a child of a diplomat. And so what that means is that I've lived in a ton of different places. My accent sounds like this. It switches between so many different countries. I remember doing a presentation once, and at the end of the presentation, I was like, does anyone have any questions? And the only question I got was, where's your accent from? I was like, girl, I don't know. It's from everywhere that I've lived. So yes, so to that point, essentially I came here by myself. I was in boarding school. I used to go back for holidays, and then I came to uni, and I've just been here by myself ever since.
With you having lived in so many different places in your childhood, what impact do you feel like that's had on you today?
It's an interesting one. These are very personal questions, Stephen. I didn't expect this.
1,000 voices. We keep on your toes here.
I know, definitely. I would say it's made me very hyper independent, and that is a good thing and a bad thing. And I've just recently come to accept that it has its advantages and its disadvantages. Advantages being you adapt, you learn to swim in whatever the situation. And I think that has lended me very well in my career. As you've said, my career is so wide and vast, and I'm only 30. Sometimes it shocks me, and I don't really spend some time to think about it. So yes, those are the advantages of it. The disadvantages of it are that you don't know how to particularly build community, and that in itself is can be challenging. And that's only because you're used to being on your own, and you're used to the sink or swim situation. You're used to swimming by yourself. So either asking for help doesn't come naturally to you. And it crept up again a couple of weeks ago. So my best friend was moving houses, and we all went over, and, she just bought her new home, and all excited for her, and helped her move in. And I made a comment. I was like, yeah, when I moved, I did it by myself. And she was like, I'm sorry, what do you mean you did it by yourself? I was like, I hired a man in a van, and we all moved my stuff in. And she was like, why didn't you say? And it was in that moment that I thought, yeah, I literally could have just sent a message, right? But that just doesn't come naturally to me because I'm just used to doing it by myself, right? Like, my family's not here. And it's not to say that all my friends, like, if I reached out to any of them and told them, they would jump and help me. Like, I'm blessed with the friends I have, but it just doesn't come naturally to do that. So yeah, those are the advantages and disadvantages of it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And next question I want to ask is about you discovering your passion. Now, to caveat or to add some context to that question, when I was looking into your profile, I could see that from very young, you started going back home to Africa and doing some volunteering work. I think you must have probably been about 16, 17. You was a teenager, essentially, when I was looking.
Oh my God, have you gone all the way back?
Yeah. We do our research here. But then, so you've been doing that work from when you were young. And at the same time, you've grown up with your parents in the science field. And that's obviously, where you've embarked upon and gone and done your degree, done your PhD, and that's the field that you're in, the life science field specifically anyway. So it's like, what I'm wanting to find out is, with you going back to Africa and with you going and embarking upon in the science field, at what stage do you feel like you found your passion, and how did you find it? Did you know that was your passion back then, or?
So interestingly, if we take it a step back, so I got into science by virtue of just not being good at history and geography. It was very simple for me. I never got geography. My directions are still quite bad. My friends will tell you. I never got history, and I know someone said to me, Elsa, how did you not get history? Just remembering dates. Yeah, no, doesn't make too much sense to me. And I never got literature because describing curtains and everything that came with it did not come naturally to me either. So what were my other options, right? Scientists and biology made 100 and, made all the sense to me. So for starters, that was when I knew, okay, well, that's the direction that we're going in. Now, what we're going to do with it, we're yet to see. Started up actually wanting to do medicine. That didn't work out. And then I was like, okay, so what else are we going to do? A couple of things, again, which is that whole nature versus nurture. By virtue of my dad being in the UN, I think at the time that you're talking about, my first work experience was in Ghana, because at the time we were based in Ghana, in Accra. And my dad was UNAID something, can't remember his exact title, exact position. And he was traveling around the different regions in Ghana to just look at the toll of HIV and AIDS in the different regions, their access to antiretroviral drugs, their communities, and how UNAIDS is actually, how the work that they're doing is actually benefiting and impacting the different communities. And there was one holiday, I think I went on this trip with him. And we traveled all the way. Any Ghanaians listening? Actually, you're Ghanaian.
Yeah.
I did. We lived in Accra, and then we drove up to Kumasi, did some work in Kumasi, drove all the way up north to Bolga, Tamale, Wa. And anyone who's not Ghanaian is literally like driving from, I guess, the south of Ghana right up into the north, and worked with different communities out there. Did some work with the Society of Women Living with AIDS in Africa. So I would say that what I did at the time was just expose myself as much as possible to anything that I found remotely interesting. So I obviously did that type of work. I did work with I think it was the International Organization for Migration, and that was work around tuberculosis and looking at migration and how I think it was refugees coming in and who were not tested, either were carrying TB, and what sort of regulations could be put around that. So obviously very science things, very science-y-ish things. But also I had an interest in events and events management. And so I went online again in Ghana, and I found an event management company called Lion Hearts, and I reached out to them. I think I emailed them or something at the time and said, can I do an internship for you? And then the ladies were like, yeah, sure, come along. And so I went and did that. But then that part, my parents did not know that. So my parents thought I was going to the International Organization for Migration in the morning, which was true. They thought I was spending my whole day there. But I had this deal with the lady that I used to work with there. So I will work there till 12, and then I'll leave, and then I'll go to the events company, and I'll work there till like 5, 6, and then I'll go home.
What kind of events?
Oh, everything. Wedding, parties, 50th birthdays, christenings, everything. And I was involved in decor, arranging flower arrangements, just venues, the whole 9 yards. So again, goes to show two completely different things in quotes, but then I just explored as much as I could.
Right. And then I guess from you doing that volunteer work up and down Ghana, and with your background, having lived in a lot of different countries, I suppose, is all of these, it wasn't necessarily, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't necessarily like a one experience. It was just your life experience up until that point where you discovered, and just trying out new things where you discovered, okay, there's a problem here, and this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I want to do something about this.
Absolutely. It was by doing a lot of different things, I could say, okay, this is what I like and this is what I don't like. And this is something that I always say, that sometimes we focus too much on, okay, what is my passion, or what is it that I want to do? But sometimes the even stronger question is, what is it I do not want to do, right? And just by method of elimination, you're able to arrive at your answer. And the same thing happened after I did my PhD. It was, 9 months into my PhD, I was like, okay, I love science, I hate academia. Okay, not hate, I would prefer not to stay in academia.
Yeah.
And I remember that everyone was asking me, so what are you going to do? I'm like, no idea, but we're going to figure it out, right? So it's not always having the answer, but just knowing this is not what I'm going to do.
No, for sure. I'm a massive, strong advocate for trying out new things. That's how you're going to discover stuff. Like I was talking to someone quite recently, and she was talking about how she doesn't know what she's passionate about, etc., etc. I'm like, get out there and try new things.
Exactly.
Read more books, meet more people, go to more events, and over time, you're going to discover what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what lights that fire inside of you. And it's in doing that, that's how you're going to discover stuff, but not necessarily by just sitting back. And if you sit at home, you're not necessarily going to discover what you're passionate about. So for sure.
Sorry, not even to cut you short there, but I think another thing is by looking at what upsets me and seeing that reaction. So there are a lot of things that I would look at, right? Let's say I love events, but there's nothing particular there that really upsets me. And I think one thing I quickly realized, what I was passionate about and what I was going to be committed to was what kept me up at night by just really upsetting me. And some of the things that really upset me were when I did that work experience and looking at how women were disproportionately affected. When you're looking at essentially the women in communities who had HIV and AIDS, and they had HIV and AIDS because perhaps they were contracted from the man, but because the community was very patriarchal, the man was given a pass and the woman was kicked out. And those things really upset me, and they upset me still to this day, right? And by just knowing how upset I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to try and do something about this. And that, when you feel that feeling, to me, it's very much lean into that feeling and lean into, okay, that's clearly something I'm passionate about. That's clearly something that that triggers me, right? How do I want to do something about it? That's the first question. And if I want to do something about it, what is that thing that I am going to do about it? So, yeah.
Do you feel like we've made progress back home in particular, back in Africa, from back then when you first started going back and volunteering and doing the work there up until now? And it's very broad, the question, actually, because there's so many different health facets and things. You're talking specifically about HIV AIDS there, but there's a million different things. We can talk about vaccine efficacy and all sorts of things. But do you feel like, very generally speaking, when it comes to public health back home, we've made progress from then until now?
No, absolutely. I think we have made progress, but I guess the real question is the progress fast enough? Is the progress what it could be? Are we hitting the targets that either we set for ourselves or that we think that our countries have the potential to hit? I don't think we are. And then obviously when you bring in a different lens of what happens in high income countries, again in quotation marks, versus countries that happen south of the Sahara, again, you're looking at a different type of inequality, right? So then you start looking at access to drugs, we all saw it play out with access to vaccines. Obviously, everyone can have their own opinions about vaccines, whether you take it or not. But my stance on that is very much, at least make it available and then let people have the choice whether they want to take it or not. The same way it happened here in the UK. A lot of people decided not to take the vaccines as much as people decided to take the vaccines. So I very much think that not having access to something is in itself an inequality. Now, the choice people choose to make once they have access to that, you can't take that away. That's human choice, right? So in terms of equalizing that, I don't think we still have a long way to go, as we have obviously seen recently.
Yeah. Do you know a book called Development is Freedom?
No, actually.
Because when you was talking, it just reminded me of this book called Development as Freedom. Super, super good book. It's by a man called Amartya Sen. I might be pronouncing his first name wrong.
Okay.
But he defines development as having freedom, basically, having the freedoms to do whatever you want. So the freedom to decide whether I'm going to eat or not eat, the freedom to decide whether I'm going to have a shower or not shower. If you don't have the choice, then you're not developed in that sense. And when you're talking there about the vaccine, and some people deciding to take it, some people deciding not to take it. And then if you look at the global south, it's like they didn't even have the option to make the decision whether they want to take it or not. It's a massive inequality in that sense. And I remember reading some stories about it, and it's quite political as well, actually, when it comes to that kind of thing, because I was reading about how some, I can't remember specific countries, but there were some countries that were offering more than other maybe European counterparts were offering to get doses of the COVID vaccine, but we're not receiving it. And then other European counterparts, maybe because of relationships and whatnot, we're receiving all of the doses at a cheaper cost of what the African countries were offering for those vaccine doses. And then when you look at it like that, it's more than just it's very political. Very political.
But that's it, right? So interesting. Going back to your intro, how I actually introduce myself usually is that I sit at the intersection of science, entrepreneurship, and policy. And a lot of times some people ask, why those three heads or why those three themes? I'm like, because one almost doesn't work without the other. All three of them cannot operate in silos. Science needs to be present because we need the innovation, we need the research and development. Entrepreneurship needs to be present, in my opinion, because a lot of the vehicles that we currently have are slow to implement. So we need fast-moving, agile vehicles to get things from research and development to the people, to the masses. And then, obviously, we need policy, because like it or not, the policies that are made in number 10, in Chatham House, in Brussels, whether you... Okay, we're out of the... let's not go there. We Brexited, but let's not go there. But, the decisions that are made there literally, directly affect our access to these different vaccines, trade deals, access to literally everything. So unless we're able to sort of complete that silo and complete that circle and encourage collaboration and not operating in silos, we end up just in a vacuum, right? Where scientists are talking to scientists and essentially you're preaching to the converted. Like, okay, scientists, in my opinion, a lot of scientists get, like if you do an innovation and explaining that to another scientist is pretty easy. That is obviously a broad statement, but in comparison to explaining it to someone who is not a scientist, it obviously will take a lot more to do that. Similarly, creating policies. Again, you can argue in all your different political spheres, but until that policy is enacted and until that policy actually benefits the people, then again, in my opinion, that's still perpetuating inequalities. And then, of course, entrepreneurship, right? We create things that we are passionate about to serve and to work with communities that we are either in or we care about. And so all three need to work together. So to your point about political, well, of course it's political, right? And you need to be able to operate in those three different spheres. I mean, not particularly one person, but companies have an R&D department, they have a legal department, they probably have someone who advises them on the policies, and yeah, it's who has the biggest, usually who has the biggest teams and the biggest bank accounts wins. So yeah.
So do you feel that with the health in back home in the global south essentially, and things not accelerating or moving as quickly as it should have moved, do you feel like that's a leadership issue? Not necessarily only in government, but just people that have leadership positions in maybe global organizations and in office or whatnot. Do you feel like that's a leadership issue back home?
Of course, I think I'll start off with leadership issues in government, right? Let's move away from leaders in every other organization. In my opinion, leaders are put in government to serve the people. So your job is to do what you think is best for the people. Your job is to protect the people. If you fail to do that, again, in my opinion, you have somewhat failed at your job. So if you fail to create a system, right, where everyone has access to healthcare, again, basic right, access to education, basic right, access to employment opportunities, again, in my opinion, basic right, then there is something missing in that leadership position from a governmental standpoint. We can argue till the cows come home about intentions and corruption and all these different things and, what other organizations are doing. But like they say in French, à la base, I speak French as well. Like at the end, like the foundation, right, is very much as a government, that is your duty. Little things, like I say little, but things like passing on laws to say 11% of your GDP is going to be directed towards healthcare. That is your job as the leader to make sure that that happens. No country in Africa currently has that. Granted, I know that I don't know the stats for all the countries in the West, but I think the UK is currently at about 9% of its GDP goes to healthcare. I don't know what it is now with inflation and everything, so please nobody quote me or come for me to correct the stat. This is horrible. The statistics might be old. But I think countries in Africa, like South Africa, I think the last I checked, it was about 6 to 7% of its GDP went towards healthcare. And a lot of the other countries are lagging at like 2, 3, 4%. So we can argue about inequalities in access to vaccines and inequalities and all these different things. But as a country, how are you building your own healthcare system? How are you ensuring that the people who live in that country are able to have access to what they need when they need it? That's your job. So
if such a small percentage is going to healthcare, where's the rest of it going?
I don't know. Sorry. I have no idea. I think that's for all of us to guess, right? I'm not Minister of Finance in any country, so who knows?
Okay, cool. All right. And for people who, let's say people like in the diaspora, or maybe people like yourself who are born back home, have moved over to the West End and now are interested in doing some stuff back home, especially in this healthcare kind of space, what ways do you feel people can best get involved or help or do what they can do, to improve things?
I mean, that's a really good question, which I have not given too much thought of, if I'm being honest, because I do a lot of work by virtue of the different organizations that I've worked with, right? And that I continue to work with. So I probably would say finding either NGOs that are trusted, finding NGOs or different organizations that are going directly to those different countries and obviously on causes that you care about. And either volunteering your time or volunteering your skill set or volunteering obviously your financial resources. So there are different ways in which you can volunteer, right? And I think that's something that I quickly had to demystify myself, right? So sometimes people think, oh, maybe I don't have the money to donate, and it's not always money that is needed. Yes, money is needed, but there are other ways in which you can give. We all have value and a skill set that you can provide, whether that be in finance or medicine or sales, you're in sales, or anything to raise capital. Or, do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many different ways that you can help an NGO, a company, to be able to increase or scale its impact. Yeah.
No, definitely, for sure. And in a way, you said that you haven't given it much thought, this particular question, but you've answered it very succinctly and very well, because that's literally what you've done. Like, you literally went and volunteered and offered up your time and skills, and that's definitely something that if you don't feel like you necessarily have the financial resources to help out, you can free up some time, and there's other ways, offer skills, whatever. My wife done something similar. She went to Kenya, and for how long was it? This is before I met her, but it was like during the summer here, so that went for 6 weeks or something like that, and was doing some work with like local entrepreneurs there as well. It's like consulting work,
Right.
And that ties in with what you said about entrepreneurship as well, being one of the 3 parts of the intersections that are needed anyway to elevate and to push things forwards back home. So yeah, for sure. So definitely. And on that, actually, on the entrepreneurship side of things, particularly in this biology, biotech kind of space, do you have any like advice on what would be maybe some of the best areas is so, what's the word? I don't even know, because there's a lot of different issues, and like, what's best? One thing is good, loads of things are bad and need improvement or whatnot, but maybe areas of focus that would be maybe the best areas of focus for someone that might be interested in like doing some kind of biotech startup or business, something. What would be the best areas of focus to?
I mean, again, you'll have to come back to what you're passionate about, right? I could talk about what I'm passionate about, right? And if anyone gets any inspiration from that, then great. But biotech is vast. I particularly am passionate about personalized medicine, and what essentially that is that in the near future, I mean, it already happens now to some degree or to some extent, but in the near future, we're going to focus on personalized medicine, i.e. your treatment is going to be tailored to you, Tevin, right? And that is taking into account your genetic component, taking into account phenotypically, so what your body actually expresses, and taking into account any infections, diseases, whether that be it, God forbid, cancer or anything, or how to treat those diseases, right? So what I'm passionate about is very much how little or how small proportions of women and Black people, again, expands to quite a lot of races that are considered as underrepresented, are involved in, be it clinical trials or be it how much our genetic data is being considered when these drugs are being developed. The UK at the moment accounts for only 2% participation in clinical trials. In all clinical trials, 76% of participants are white, and only, I think globally, 11% are Black. Now, as the Black community, we have our trust issues with pharmaceutical companies, and I fully understand that. But I state all this to say that when chemotherapy is currently being developed, it's taken into account people who have participated into those clinical trials. If our genetic data has not been taken into account when creating those new drugs, that means that we have been left out in the creation of these new chemotherapy drugs. What are the effects of that? That means that eventually, I'm not wishing this upon anyone, but if any of our family members fall ill and need access to chemo drugs, yes, we would have access to the chemo drugs, but would it be best tailored to us? High chances are no. Does that put us at a risk of having higher adverse events and higher adverse reactions? High chances are yes. Does that mean that our treatment is less suitable and therefore has potentially less suitable outcomes than other participants who participated in the clinical trials? Again, high chances are yes. So, the same way women have had this movement, right, in terms of when, there are examples such as like when car seats, for example, the seatbelt was created. It was all tested on men and not with women dummies. So that meant that for a long period of time, if a car crash happened, a woman was more likely to actually suffer higher injuries because the car seat was obviously not tested with her body frame in mind. That increases the potential proportion of women who may end up even dying, right, from car accidents. It's essentially what could be played out with when it comes to, access to all these different drugs and therapies. So my passion is really focusing on how do we bring in more of our genetic data into this pool in the creation of different drugs and therapies, so that when these therapies are created, we have a fighting chance. So, yes. And I know that it's obviously a very nuanced conversation and there's so many different assets to it. But it is the mix of biology and technology. With the advent of technology now, we should be able to bring in different samples and people who've already been tested or people who already have specific diseases, and to try and find different ways to include that genetic data and creating this platform whereby all of us are taken into consideration, so that eventually when all these therapies are being created, they're created with us in mind.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. That's very insightful. Again, something else I've never really thought of like that. And it brings a totally different angle. Totally different angle that I've literally never considered.
Right.
When it comes to healthcare and medicine and clinical trials and whatnot. So thank you for all of that. Let's caveat a little bit onto entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And that's something I very, very much believe in as well. Similar to yourself, I feel like I'm a strong believer that entrepreneurs hold the answer to most of the world's most pressing issues.
Absolutely.
Very often public sector is too slow to react, and to public sector doesn't innovate as much as the private sector, etc., etc. And I feel like there's loads of examples of really cool startups that are tackling some of the world's most major issues. I want to touch on entrepreneurship quickly for a bit. So with yourself, so you've been involved in the business world in, like I said, a few different capacities. As a co-founder, as a director, as a non-exec director, right now as a consultant. So in quite a few different capacities. Can you speak, especially as in your experience as a co-founder, what you've learnt about running businesses that have that social angle, that's the social entrepreneurship, what you've learned about that?
Specifically social entrepreneurship.
Well, specifically businesses, because the businesses you founded have both had they both had social goals, I should say, to them.
True.
So any lessons that you've learned from running those businesses?
I think I'll start off by saying I believe that profit and impact can coexist under the same roof.
For sure.
I don't believe you have to sacrifice one at the expense of the other. Hence, I don't know if anyone has read this book called Dead Aid. I am very much against giving handouts. So I'm very much pro-business. I'm pro-making profit. But also, I don't believe you make profit at the expense of people, right? So the businesses I've run or founded, co-founded, we can all debate their level of success in different metrics, right? So the first one I started was called Northwest Biotech Initiative, and at the time I did not even call myself an entrepreneur. That term was put upon me, and I remember thinking, what? At the time I was still a PhD student. This was in 2014, I believe. And it was aimed at supporting students who were scientists but who wanted to explore careers outside of academia, because essentially that's what I was, right? So it was like, well, this is what I want, so I'm going to start creating events or hosting events to address this issue. And soon, before I knew it, like thousands of students were attending the events, and companies were recruiting, and we were getting sponsorships. And then I decided, okay, hang on, this is actually, well, not I decided, someone actually said to me, I was like, this is actually a business. And I was like, okay, not considered that, but sure, let's do it. In that business, I learned the power of building community and the power of bringing people together for a mission and a cause, because obviously everyone was a volunteer. We were not getting paid. I was not getting paid. So really defining that mission and defining that why, especially if you're building something for a social cause, is so important, because that is what everybody's buying into. And that is why people are working the crazy hours that they're working, because everyone that was doing anything with NBI at the time was a PhD student. And that in itself is very demanding, until it came to a point where I did not have the headspace to lead it anymore, because I had to really focus on my PhD. It's like, I need to actually finish this PhD. So yes, I think I definitely would say that. And I think, crazily enough, that I would call that a success, because it's still running today. I'm not running it, and it's no longer registered as an actual business per se. It's still running in a different sort of model, very much on the University of Manchester. And I actually spoke at the event last week. Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday. Yes, yesterday.
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 Yeah.
That goes to tell you the number of things I do. I could not keep track of days. It's like, it happens. And that's that. Okay, so yeah, I spoke at the event this week. Let's go with that. And when I was chatting to them, they wanted me to come up for their next event in February, and it's a Women in STEM event. And they were like, yeah, we can pay your travel, we can pay this. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? When I started this in 20, we couldn't pay anything. Yeah. But, it was a very proud moment. And it's great to see that it's carrying on to deliver that impact. But then that in itself is the mission and the vision. And that's where people would gather and gravitate towards. I also learned my areas of development as a leader. And still definitely working on that. Next, I would say I got involved in another startup that was mitigating unconscious bias in the recruitment space. And alongside co-founded a CIC, community interest company, looking at engaging with, increasing women and girls' participation in STEM, people who are neurodivergent, and people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. There, I would say I learned, that was really, I would say, my startup bootcamp. Very much startup bootcamp. I did everything from, when I say I did everything, it's not like I did everything for the companies, no. I mean, the things I got involved in, I was involved in pitching. I was pitching. I think the startup in itself raised about £150,000, I think, from a mixture from angel investors as well as from competitions that we won. I was involved in sales. Literally, it's 360. So one day you're doing, probably even in the same day, you're doing sales in the morning, you're doing pitching in the afternoon, you're doing marketing in the evening and preparing for the next day. And it really taught me the different layers of starting a business, right? So we employed some people not on a full-time basis, more as contractors. And again, it's just managing those relationships. You're managing the brand that you're building. You're managing your own self. And there I would definitely say I learned, that was startup bootcamp. You're doing financial modeling. You're looking at the profit. You're looking at the pricing. You're talking to investors. You're talking about raising your next round. We did so many different things. So we pitched at the palace in front of quite a few different royals. That was one of the Duke of York's events that, probably should not really talk about. But hey, it was a proud moment. We were on the GCHQ and Wire Accelerator. I think it had a 4% acceptance rate. So we got on that. We were on the 360 Lab Accelerator. There we won 100,000 euros out of pitching at that competition. Again, probably like 5 out of, 1,000 people that applied. Won, I think there was a Entrepreneurship World Cup that we won, again, pitching. So public speaking in itself, I learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about how I work, learned a lot about what it means to be public facing. I've pitched at a business for 30 seconds and I've pitched a business for 3 minutes. So now when people say to me, Elsa, can you speak for 10 minutes? I'm like, what am I going to say for 10 minutes? Like, that feels long to me now.
Yeah.
Because, you've learned how to do all of that. So yes, I would definitely say there I learned what it truly means to do try and create a business out of nothing, right? Because that's what it is. You're literally going against the wind and you're trying to create something out of nothing. So that was that experience. Non-exec roles. I am on a few boards. University of Salford. I'm a council member, so it will class as a non-exec role. Science and Industry Museum. I am a advisory board. Smart Works Greater Manchester, a charity that supports women to get back into work through coaching and through providing them with outfits for interviews, even makeup, bags, shoes. And this is something that really, really is close to my heart, not just because I love fashion, which I do, but very much because the power of an outfit to change your whole confidence. And you see women who have been out of work for years, who have come out of abusive relationships, who literally their confidence might be, trailing on the floor, and being able to take them through that process of rebuilding themselves. I think the most important tool a woman can ever have is to be financially independent, married or not. Obviously, people have their different opinions about this, but that's my own different opinion. That's my own opinion. I believe you should choose to work because you want to or because you've decided to. Again, this is the whole point of choice, right? Be able to and say, no, I don't want to, rather than not work because I can't or because there's some other factor inhibiting. Like, if today I decided I don't want to work, that's a personal choice. But I know that tomorrow, if I wanted to work, I could get up and go and work. But for someone to say, I can't because I can't, that's different. And I definitely think that all women should be able to do that. So there, I'm a trustee. Meghan Markle is actually one of the patrons of the charity. And those roles have taught me a different level of strategy, and very much what we see today in museums, in universities and charities and whatever. These are things that have been planned, 3-4 years out, right? So today we're planning next however many couple of years. We're not planning what's happening tomorrow or next year. And so it has forced me to really, I used to say that I was very strategic, but now it's having to go into another level and really planning your moves and your steps and the why of why you do what you do. So yeah, those are the 3 different capacities. Obviously now as a consultant, but that's a different point, but let's stop there.
That's good. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. I want to, let's move on a little bit actually. So with what sort of a world do you envision?
Wow, these questions that you're coming up with. What sort of world do I envision? I envision a world where, I will start by it, women can choose to do what they feel like doing at any point because that is what they want to do. That whether that be it working or not working, whether that be going in science, technology, engineering and maths, or going into, the arts. But just that choice, where we can all have access to the same opportunities. Obviously, the impact of that are being able to have your financial freedom, have your financial independence, But obviously you go down into the pay gap and all those different things. So that's another layer. But that's the first thing I would say, right? And I would say women of all cultures and all religions. I envision a world where my people, as I like to call them, all Africans, are able to move in spaces and create and have creations that work for them. Invent solutions to problems in the way that works for them, right? As we've seen, what is created in the West does not necessarily mean that it's going to work in the global South. In so many ways, actually, the global South has some inventions and innovations that work, that are actually light years ahead. So, for example, one of them is mobile money. And that is something that, from a tech entrepreneurial point of view, I studied quite a bit in terms of what was working in, like, I think it's called M-Pesa in Kenya and, in a lot of different countries. And that's not the case here. And that works there, right? So, yes, that's definitely number 2. And I think number 3, I would say a world where we're all healthy, right? Because health is wealth, right? Again, my opinion. A world where we have equal access to, if I felt ill today, I have equal access to the same treatments and the same quality of the treatments, right? Which is why I'm going back down to that, granularity of it. Like, I could have access to the same treatment, but if that treatment is not suitable to me, then, it's still subpar. So, yeah, those are the 3 things I would say.
Perfect. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to drive change in whatever industry or field that they're in?
I said this over the weekend. I would say, number 1, know your lane and stay in it. I was fortunate enough to find or know my lane quite early enough. And it wasn't always considered as, the scientist was as sexy as it is today. And somehow it's become something interesting. And I'm like, okay. So it's not to be fazed by, the waves and all the different, it's just knowing who you are and knowing that lane and staying in it. And I would say also knowing when to push and also knowing when to exit. Knowing when to push as in, okay, is this just an opportunity wrapped in a problem and it's a problem I can solve and I'm going to stay and solve it? But also knowing when time's up. And this is as far as the road is going to go on this particular problem. And that's a personal decision to make. So, yeah.
Great. Perfect. And finally, as we prepare to wrap up, what's next for you in your journey?
Oh, what's next for me? I definitely will be working on solving the problem of personalized medicine and bringing in our genetic data into different ways to create more efficient therapy for all people. That will probably be the primary thing I'll be working on. But I will continue staying involved in doing, all the different impact things that I do, whether that be it talking about science and entrepreneurship and policy in the different ways and equality for women and all the things that come with it. I still will do that. So that wouldn't change.
Perfect. Okay, that's that. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the podcast once again, Elsa. That was amazing. I learned a hell of a lot. Like some of the things you said, yeah, and the way you said that, I was thinking, wow, I've never looked at it like that before. So thank you so much for coming on once again. It's very much appreciated. As we wrap up, have you got any final words that you want to share? And also, if anybody wants to keep up to date with yourself and your work, how can they best do so?
Sure, so I'll start with that. On all socials, I'm at Elsa Zekeng. So Elsa as in Princess Elsa. And my surname is Zekeng. And so, yeah, at Elsa Zekeng on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and a lot. Any passing words, no, just stay true to yourself and change will come.
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming to the podcast once again. If you are listening and if you haven't subscribed and liked the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to this on yet, please do. It really, really does help us with getting out these inspirational stories, these inspirational people out as far and wide as possible. So please do like, subscribe, and leave us a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. But that's that for now. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of 1000 Voices. We had the amazing science entrepreneur, aka Dr. Elsa Zekeng. This is 1000 Voices, and for now, people, we're out. Cool.